What did you have in mind?
You could serve Germany or the Fuhrer. Not both.
It's just that talk that had you sent here, Colonel.
What I said was much worse. I'm a soldier. But in serving my country, I have betrayed my conscience.
We need to reorganize.
There has to be a chance of success.
That's why you're here.
Hitler's Germany has seen its last sunrise. Can I count you in?
Any problem on Earth can be solved with the careful application of high explosives. The trick is not to be around when they go off.
10 minutes. 1 for the checkpoint. 2 for the walk. 1 to the bunker, 6 to get out. Plenty of time.
But remember, nothing ever goes according to plan.
Operation Valkyrie is in effect.
If they catch you, they will pull you apart.
If I fail, I'll come for you. All of you.
I know.
Do you realize what you've done?
We've been discovered. Every second we stand here is a second lost. If you want to live through the night, you'll do exactly as I say.
What makes you think you're stronger than the very momentum of history?
My Fuhrer, may I present Colonel Stauffenberg?
Valkyrie.
I don't know if a few years ago you saw the movie Valkyrie, based on a true story of a group of Christians and fellow Germans who tried to come against the Nazi regime. What's left out of the movie is the family that did most of the organizing. It was the Bonhoeffers. In fact, during the movie, you don't even hear mention of a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because it's during that entire time he and his family had helped plan this revolution to come against Hitler. But he himself, Dietrich, was in jail during that time for 1.5 years because he had been smuggling Jewish friends and colleagues out of the country at that time. But his family was organizing this endeavor because of their belief in Jesus and the message of the Bible. They could not do anything during this time. So today we're going to look at the story behind the story of Valkyrie, the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Let's watch.
He left a secure pastoral position in New York City and returned on the last ship to Germany. He astounded prominent theologians with his passionate intellect. Now, Hitler viewed him as a threat. He was banned from Berlin, forbidden to speak, write, or publish. He wore the mask of a patriotic pastor, but became a double agent. In the Abwehr intelligence agency, he traveled to Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. He used his ecumenical contacts to sabotage Nazi war strategies and smuggled German Jews to Switzerland. But the Gestapo uncovered the smuggling activity, and Hitler discovered his assassination plot. Weeks before the inevitable fall of the Third Reich, Bonhoeffer and other Abwehr conspirators were executed by Hitler's direct command. As Dietrich was ordered to follow the guards, he pulled a fellow prisoner aside and said, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life."
As you learn about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as you read about him, you see this is a guy who lived an extraordinary, ordinary life. I mean, it's extraordinary the things he came against. It's extraordinary the things that he did. And yet he did it in such an ordinary way. It was ordinary decisions, one step at a time. One decision at a time. One courageous moment at a time. And as I was reading his book, or the book about his life, I asked myself, am I living an extraordinary, ordinary life? I mean, is life more than just entertaining ourselves with movies and TV? Is it more than just living for the weekends or making money? What does it mean to have an extraordinary life daily as a dad, as a father, as a leader, as a mom, as a grandmother? Because the life of the Bonhoeffers is a continual deposit of extraordinary, ordinary moments. But what does it mean to have an extraordinary life? Is it something that happens to us? That's what's extraordinary? Extraordinary circumstances? I become famous, I make the deal, I launch into new territory. Is it something out there that I wait on? Maybe it's when. When I make such and such as my payroll. When my savings get to such and such amount. That would be extraordinary. Is it just moments? We just had an extraordinary vacation. Or my daughter's wedding was extraordinary. And then after that high, we come crashing back down to the ordinary. Is it possible to inject the extraordinary into the ordinary moments of life? The Bible says yes. That whatever your background, whatever your interest, whatever your talents, whatever your skills, everyone can live an extraordinary, ordinary life. It's the domino impact of changing the world. And in one sense, it begins in Dietrich's life with education. His education, his family influence him. It's a grandmother, it's a father. And those influence create a domino impact on his life. And that domino impact impacts his church and his upbringing and his schooling and his trip to America, that ultimately each one of these ordinary, extraordinary decisions leads him face to face with the very face of evil, Adolf Hitler. Let's look at the first domino. The first domino that we see in his life is his extraordinary, ordinary family. I mean, it's extraordinary. Many of us have families of influence and families with backgrounds, maybe with somebody famous who was in it or somebody who did some great thing. But when you look at the Bonhoeffer family, you see something extraordinary in the midst of ordinary people. In fact, the Bonhoeffer name is so famous that to this day, the Bonhoeffer crest is still carved into buildings all over Germany because of the impact his family had, not only with Adolf Hitler, but in the arts. There were doctors in his family, lawyers, people of high society, people who had achieved really great things in almost every arena could be found in the Bonhoeffers, both sides of the tree. And yet as high influential people, of high society people, they were known for being humble and caring and incredibly others-focused. What's striking about the Bonhoeffers, in fact, is that they use their influence constantly to change the world around them. They were full of geniuses. One of Bonhoeffer's relatives actually helped Einstein invent the atom bomb. I mean, these guys were brilliant. And instead of that family legacy being a burden that you had to live up to, it was actually a launching pad that inspired generations of children and grandchildren and cousins and uncles to say, there's a legacy at stake here. This is his grandfather. His grandfather was a circuit court judge known all through Germany, had incredible influence in law, but he was also married to an incredible woman. And this woman had a domino impact on Dietrich's life. Grandmother was 93 by the time she passed away, and Dietrich wrote about the impact she had in his life. She just lived out her commitment to God in such a powerful way. She believed in humanity. She believed in human rights. She had lots of friends who were German and that were Jewish. As they grew up together and were influenced by his grandmother had really been influenced in such a way that it influenced his mom. His mom learned from a theologian at the time, a man by the name of Count Zinzendorf, that the Bible or religion or Christianity wasn't about ritual or platitudes. It was about a living faith, a personal relationship with God. It wasn't just about going to church. It was about being his follower. Well, this so impacted grandmother and mom that mom began to have Bible time with the kids. And she would talk about learning the Bible, and she would teach them directly from the Bible, not a children's story. And as she taught them from the Bible, she taught them how to fall in love with God, not to be religious. She taught them how to pray, how to make it personal, how to have a living faith. Karl Zinderdorf's impact will also impact John Wesley, and John Wesley will impact Ben Franklin, and will impact many of the founders of our nation. One domino impact after another. What does it look like to have a living faith? Now his father influenced him. He was not a Christian, but he was a doctor of neurology, one of the first in Germany. He had no acceptance of fuzzy thinking. He really challenged Bonhoeffer to have sharp thinking skills. He was there during Bible time and supported his wife and kids because he thought the education from the Bible increased compassion and selflessness and conviction. He found that important in their life. So Bonhoeffer is impacted in so many ways by his family. He has incredible convictions, intellect. He understands a personal relationship with God, and that grace in our life, when we understand the main message of the Bible, that God came from heaven to earth to forgive us and love us, it's not just a private thing in your life, it should be played out in your life. Your private belief should play out in the public arena. So he grows up together with a twin sister. And as they grew up together, his twin sister Sabine said that even at the early age of 6, his character and the sweetness of his character was seen. They were out hiking one time together, and they saw this creature over the water. And he says, "Look, the creature, get behind me, sister, I will protect you." It was a dragonfly. But even at age 6, we have these extraordinary, ordinary moments of wanting to protect those and look out for other people who might be in danger. So the influence of his family is so striking to him. It makes me think of a passage in the Bible from 2 Timothy. Paul is writing to a man named Timothy, and he says, "I see the character you have, I see the faith you have. I call to remembrance the genuine faith which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois." Here was a grandmother living out typical grandmotherly things. Here was a mother just trying to pour into her child's life. You know, this grandmother and mother create a domino impact into a little child that will one day take on Adolf Hitler, one domino at a time. So the first domino is his extraordinary family. The second domino we're going to look at is the domino of his influence, both in Berlin, his education, and his trip to America. His influence. He grows up in Berlin, and like I said, his dad was very keen on sharp thinking skills. And if you said something, you had to keep your commitments if you were around dad. So Dietrich said that he was going to go to school because he wanted to go into education. So he heads to Berlin, and he is a genius. He gets his PhD by the time he's 21 years old. He's a Doogie Howser of his day. For those of you younger than 40, he was a child prodigy. The teachers are petitioning to have him in his class because of his sharp thinking skills. There's something about this guy. Ordinarily using his education, using this moment, so one of the top skills and one of the top schools of teaching you how to think and how to process and how to defend and how to speak. He does his PhD in what is the church? What is a church supposed to be? And as he began to explore what Jesus' idea of the church was, he said it wasn't about religion, it wasn't about platitudes, and church wasn't even about ritual. It was about accepting the message of God's forgiveness in your life personally and allowing that message, as God is your forgiver, to God to be your leader and to lead you. And he begins to influence the church. He begins to teach people how to teach others to pray. But then he decides to head to America, so he gets on a boat. And on his way to America, he wants to have other cultural experiences. So he comes to America in New York about the time of the jazz days, and he begins to experience just incredible cultures that you can only find in New York, even in those days. But he also begins to attend different churches. His heartbeat for the church manifests itself not just in academia, but now he wants to be in the church to help influence people and change the world. So he starts going to different churches, and he is aghast at the condition of the church in America. He says he goes to pastor after pastor, church after church, and he can't find any church even remotely talking about the main message of the Bible. Oh, they talk about being a good person. They talk about helping the needy, but they don't talk about why you help the needy and why you want to be a good person. The main message of the Bible, that God forgave you and gave you eternal life and rescued you from eternal destruction. No one's even talking about it. And he says, well, how could you expect the message of God to take root if you're not even proclaiming the message? Except he begins to visit the black churches in New York. And he finds power there. He finds impact there. In fact, he says the worship he never heard. He was a Lutheran German. He never heard black gospel music. People who were singing with power and might and passion. And so he began to teach in a black church. And he got to experience racism. He can't believe that Christian people who believe in the Bible treat people differently based on the color of their skin. And they treat him differently because he's friends with them. And these ordinary moments give him a sense of what it looks like to be in a society that people call themselves a Christian or follower of God, but they don't live it out in any way. He heads down south, it's even worse, separate drinking fountains and separate trains, and he's just nauseated by this fact. He's nauseated because when he taught and studied about the church, he said the church, based on a passage in Galatians, a church should be a place where there's no German or Jew, there's no rich or poor. Everyone comes together, being created by God, being humbled by their need for his forgiveness, and being exalted by his message of grace. And all these influences in Germany and America set him up for the next domino. See, the next domino, he finds himself needing ordinary conviction. Because while he's been in America, Adolf Hitler has been rising to power. He was relatively unknown when Dietrich left. He was the 9th largest political party and only had 12 members in the parliament. But Hitler knew that the way to get power was to get the bulk of the German Lutherans to vote him into power. How would he do this? He began to appeal to German nationality. Don't we want to have a great nation? He began to talk about the morality and the decay in the nation. Can you believe how bad we've gotten as a nation, how immoral we've become? And the Christians in the churches like this message of this political leader. But he knows that that's not going to do it. He knows that most of them are Lutherans, and the Lutheran church came from a man named Martin Luther, hundreds of years earlier in the 1500s. He was the founder of Protestantism, the founder of moving away from the Catholic Church to say there is a main message of the Bible, some of the very things that Bonhoeffer was saying. But toward the end of his life, Martin Luther went off the rails, and he began to say some of the most racist, horrible, terrible things about Jewish people, calling them whoremongers and advocating murder to the Jewish people. And Hitler takes his statements and begins to share them with the church and say, see, even your hero, Martin Luther, agrees with me. The problem is that Jews and Gentiles were both in the church in Germany at that time. So there were hundreds, thousands of Christian Jews in the church, and Hitler's trying to kick them out. So how will he do it? How will he get them out of the church? He's got to divorce Christianity from its Jewishness. You know, like that Jewish Old Testament and that Jewish Messiah and those Jewish disciples and the Jewish early church and that Jewish message. How in the world do you separate Christianity, which is Judaism fulfilled, from its Judaism? But that's what he tries to do. So he tries to take over. Many of the pastors of the day decide, well, let's ride the power. Don't speak out against the government. Don't speak out against Hitler. Let's just go along with it, and maybe we'll be put in places of influence as we cooperate with him and do what he says. Now, Bonhoeffer lectures. He says, these aren't churches. What's at stake is whether a church is really a church. A real church is where Jew and German stand together under the word of God. Whatever this thing has become, this isn't Christianity, this isn't the Bible, this is some neo-paganism with a label on it. He gives a lecture right before Hitler becomes the Fuhrer against the Fuhrer principle. He says a Christian understanding of government is that God, the Creator, gives inalienable rights to individuals, and they loan those rights to the government. The problem with a Fuhrer government, he's not accountable to God, he's not accountable to the people, and no Christian should turn government into God. Well, this message is not going over well. Everyone else is saying, shh, 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 shh. Come on, just go along with the program. But he won't. And he doesn't. He won't go along with the program. He thinks the conviction of the church is to speak out, to be the conscience of the state. And now the courage he's got to have, because none of his colleagues are on board with this, He writes a commentary in the book of Psalms, which is a book in the middle of the Old Testament. And Hitler bans him because the Psalms are very Jewish. And he was trying to divorce Judaism from Christianity. And the people are so poorly educated, have such a poor understanding of the Bible and the main message of the Bible, that they go along with it. So Hitler knows now the way to influence is to infiltrate the church. So Hitler begins to pick pastors that he thinks are on his side, and he begins to petition and put his people in the right place within all the churches in Germany. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is working against that. He's trying to get real gospel-centered, grace-filled, knowledgeable the Bible pastors and leaders in place, but ultimately Hitler's influence prevails. And despite not having anyone on his background, no one with him, another domino's got to fall. And this next domino, he has extraordinary, ordinary courage and conviction. He's preaching a message one day at his church. He's still in Germany. And as he's preaching, he's speaking from Jeremiah. Jeremiah is an interesting passage in the Old Testament. When you get to see this courage, he says, Jeremiah was not eager to be a prophet. When called, he shrank back, he resisted, and he ran. The message of Jeremiah is that God called Jeremiah to do very hard things, to speak out, and ultimately he would be killed for his conviction. It was a depressing sermon. Everybody wondered why he was going on and on. It just seemed so melancholy. He was preaching that message to himself. He knew that God had a call on his life, that he had to do what needed to be done, even if it resulted in his own death. But obeying God and being in the truth, even if it meant his death, he would be accomplishing God's purpose for his life, his destiny, and it would be glorious because of it. Now Hitler, at the same time, is trying to knock out the Jewish businesses, so he puts a boycott in place. His SA men are standing in front of businesses and don't let you go into any of the businesses because he's trying to bankrupt them all. Now the Bonhoeffers had a brother-in-law who was actually a Jewish lawyer at the time. So they had family connections, but they also had just a deep sense of conviction and courage to stand up against this. One woman walks past the SA officers to go shopping that day. It's Dietrich's grandmother. They say, "You can't go in there, it's boycotted." And she says, "I can shop wherever I want. I'm 93. And Dietrich realizes if my grandmother can stand up to the SA officers, and if she's got enough courage and conviction to stand up for her friends who are Jewish, then so can I, and I will as well. However, many of his friends say, "Dietrich, you're on the hit list. They're out to get you." So they smuggle him to America. And on his way, which many of his friends of influence had found a way to get him out of the country, it was very difficult. Time, energy, money. But on the boat ride on the way back to America, he's not feeling at peace. He's not feeling like he's doing what God has asked him to do. Meanwhile, Hitler is frustrated at Christianity. He says, I wish our country had more of the Japanese ideals that have a sense of honor for dying. It'd be easier to infiltrate that culture. Or I wish we had Muhammad's religion. That would be easier to infiltrate than this Christianity with its flabby commitment to weakness and caring for the poor. Hitler hated Christianity, though he had used it to get himself into power. Bonhoeffer is not at peace. He realizes that God is calling him, though he was safe in America, to go back to Berlin. So he goes back to suffer and work against Hitler and Nazi Germany. While he's there, he uses his network. He uses his network of his family of influence all over Germany to begin to smuggle Jews out of the country. At that time, he heard that Hitler had actually gone into Poland, and while he was in Poland, he sent his men, Germans, dressed up like the Polish, to pretend that Poland was firing on him so that he could have a justified war. He then would go in, would take Jewish people in particular, and Polish, and they would actually have them work and then push them into synagogues, and they would burn the synagogues down. And as Bonhoeffer sees just how bad it really is, the lies, the death, the evil, he says, I cannot sit back. I can't sit back. I've got to have extraordinary courage in ordinary moments to step into the game. And that ultimately will lead to an extraordinary, ordinary death. See, the next domino to fall is how he uses the network of his family. See, as he comes back, One of his family members was already an agent, pretending to work for Hitler, but at the same time working against Hitler, meeting with the Allied forces, the Abwehr. So as Dietrich comes back, he says, let's tell everybody you're back on the side, you're on Hitler's side, but really work with us in the conspiracy behind the scenes. So he works with the Abwehr, and they begin to have free access all over Germany during a wartime because they're in the Abwehr. But as they meet country to country, they're secretly working with the Allied forces, with Churchill's men and others, to say, there's Germans amongst us who are trying to undermine what Hitler's doing. He comes up with codes and plans and passports to get from place to place, to get imprisoned Jews and bring them to escape. All the time, right under Hitler's nose. Now, they eventually discover that he had been smuggling Jews out, and they put him in prison. But he wasn't too concerned, though he fell in love with a woman at that time, and he wasn't able to marry her because he was in prison for 1.5 years in a very small, cramped cell. He was writing codes during that time, and those codes are ways in which he would send messages, what was going on and what he knew and how to get information out. So here is this pastor, ultimately a martyr, but currently a spy, working against the Hitler regiment from inside of a jail cell. They concoct a plan called Valkyrie, which is a way they were going to overthrow Hitler from the inside out by using his own men against him. But he figured he'd get out of prison easily, because all they had on him was the fact that he smuggled some Jews out. He knew he wouldn't be killed for that, though Hitler was mad about it. However, Valkyrie failed. The bomb that they had placed next to Adolf Hitler, the explosive, right before it was to go off, it was pushed, the suitcase, just a couple people down. Killed many of the Hitler leaders, but it did not kill Hitler himself. And all of a sudden, with Valkyrie falling apart, questions start being asked. And as the questions are asked, who planned the assassination of Adolf Hitler? The name Dietrich Bonhoeffer was revealed. And now Hitler is furious because Hitler knows that this man had gone after him. He transfers him to a place where his family hasn't even seen him now for months. He writes this note in case no one ever finds him, just to let him know, I was here and I'm still trusting in God even in the midst of this kind of circumstance and this kind of difficulty. And on April 8th of 1945, 3 weeks prior to the end of the war, 3 weeks before Hitler will kill himself, Hitler will have Dietrich Bonhoeffer killed here, buried in this crater. He'll send his men out to grab Bonhoeffer and many others who are working in the Abwehr. And what was so striking is those who watched Dietrich in his last days said that he had a cause worth living for, but he also had a cause worth dying for. And it was this cause that he lived for that gave him incredible peace, that as he went to the gallows, one said they saw him kneeling and praying in complete peace as he went to the gallows to be killed. See, years earlier, he had preached a message about what Christianity was. He said Christianity at its core is a liberation. Christianity at its core is not only the forgiveness of God, but a deep sense of freedom, of knowing that even the worst that can be done to you is death has been beaten. And this isn't extra credit Christianity. This was normal understanding Christianity. If you were a real follower of Christ, you knew for sure that if you die, you would go to heaven. You know for sure that the fear of death, though you don't want to die, but it ultimately had been conquered by Jesus. And that this was normal thinking, normal process Christianity. And as he approached his final death, he had a great peace with God. And that is where he turned to his fellow prisoner, as it's reported, and said, for many this is the end, but for me, it is the beginning of life. And in his final hours, in the most destitute of circumstances, we see a fearless, courageous leader who, even though he would die at, I think, age 28, he knew he had accomplished the purpose God had on his life. He said, when you become a follower of Christ, when you ask Christ to be your forgiver and leader, not only is the fear of death gone, but at that moment in your life, you have this, he described as a homesickness for heaven. You just can't wait to one day be in the presence of the God you love and know loves you. Now that's an extraordinary, ordinary life. It's how God used a grandmother and a lawyer and a business owner and a father and a grandfather. A decision to speak out when your colleagues won't. A decision to do what's right when others won't. And the message of Dietrich Bonhoeffer to you and I is, will we live the extraordinary, ordinary life that God has for us, whatever it would be? Will we step into our destiny, whatever God would have it? Would we ask Him to give us His extraordinary courage that we could live it out in ordinary moments in our life? Do we know for sure that death has been defeated? Do we know for sure that we are at peace with God because He's forgiven us? If not, invite it in. Invite God to be your forgiver. Get that confidence and that fearlessness and that courage today. And then begin to see every moment of every day as a chance to live out that purpose. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Your whole life becomes a spiritual act of worship or worthship. You give worth to who God is. But it begins with one step. God, give me your extraordinary courage that I can live out in my ordinary moments. I love how Jesus says it. Jesus says, I came that you may have life, and life more abundantly. I came to give you extraordinary life. Imagine if you knew for sure that eternity was guaranteed. And imagine you knew for sure that God was with you right now, whatever you face. How would that change how you handle worry? How would that handle how you face the unknown? If you knew for sure that you weren't alone, self-doubt or self-hatred. Do you see how that courage and that message would change everything about the way you live your ordinary lives? When you begin to see the folks in your family not as kids that need to be wrestled around, but as eternal creations of God that you are getting a chance to input into and shape and aim in the direction to find their purpose. All of a sudden, there's no unordinary moments. Every moment's not ordinary. Every moment's extraordinary. If you don't have that confidence, and if you don't know that to be true, God says you can just pray a simple prayer and ask for it and say, God, I want what Dietrich had. I hope I don't end where Dietrich ended up, but I want what he had. Forgive me for what I've done wrong. Come and lead me in the ordinary moments of life. And when you do that, you will find extraordinary courage. And you'll be able to face whatever discomfort, whatever challenges, or whatever way God calls you into the unknown in your life. In fact, I want you to hear the story of somebody who's done just that. He's made a courageous decision to step out of his comfort zone into the unknown because of what God's been doing in his life. Let's watch.
I graduated from high school and decided to enlist in the Navy. I spent 2.5 years in the Navy and then was accepted to the Naval Academy. At the end of my 4 years, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps and went on to serve 6.5 years in the Marine Corps. Spent most of my time in telecommunications. After 6.5 years, my wife and I elected to decide it was time to get out of the military. Found that military life is not that great for family life, and we wanted to start a family. I left the military in 2003 and went to work for a major retailer, moving positions about every year, year and a half. Decided to change jobs and with another company, making more advancements, moving up the ladder, ended up having a six-figure salary. God gained my attention in life by showing me what was not important. And that was my job title, my salary, going after material things, and basically living a life where God was only a small part of my life and not the whole thing. before my daughter was born in 2004, my wife and I struggled with infertility for about 4 years. It was during that time that the idea of adoption began to materialize, and that maybe that was something that God was calling us to do. I had the opportunity in 2008 to go to the Dominican Republic on a mission trip. It was at that time that truly I could tell that God was calling me to go and support orphans. The day that I got in line to come back, to get on the plane to come back to America, was the day that I wanted to just give up my ticket and say, this is where I want to be. Just to see kids that were fatherless and living in poverty situations just broke my heart even more. I found back-to-back here in Cincinnati, and got the opportunity to go to Cancun, Mexico in 2012 with the youth group. Back-to-back serves in 3 different countries, in Mexico, in India, and in Nigeria. And right now, all 3 of those are potential places that we could go. Cancun, Mexico, obviously is a place that Horizon is at, and that's kind of where our desire was to go. We've learned that we potentially could serve in India, that maybe that was where God was calling us. What are the different things that involve going to this country? And the big one is that India is halfway around the globe. Mexico is only a 3-hour flight away, and you could potentially drive to Cancun or Monterey, and now we're talking about something that's a 23-hour flight. India, I would say, is probably that biggest challenge or biggest prayer that I could actually pray for. The materialism that I've had in my life, and the job titles, and just climbing the corporate ladder, that whole piece of it,